The silver thread had worked its way through the outer layer of skin on Tyne's left wrist sometime during the second night, and she hadn't noticed until she smelled herself bleeding. She noticed strange things like that now, had for the past 2 days, since the moment the Accord Master's men had come for her, in the washing room at the 3rd hour of morning, while she was sorting linens by candlelight, and brought her here, to the threshold stone in the great hall of Ironspire, where she had been made to kneel and had been kneeling ever since. Her knees had stopped hurting on the first day. They were simply numb now, pressed into centuries of cold granite, and the numbness had spread upward through her thighs in a way that felt permanent. She did not think about it. She had learned, over 12 years of service, how to partition her body from her mind the way you partition a cramped room with a hanging sheet. Inadequate, transparent, but better than nothing. The great hall was being dressed for tomorrow's ceremony. Ironspire's banners hung from the gallery, black and deep green, the colors of the Ashenvale line. Servants moved around her without looking at her, which was not unusual. She had spent 12 years in this keep. Being moved around, you learned to exist in the negative space of other people's attention. You learned to fold yourself into doorways and shadows and the blank space beside furniture. You learned that being noticed was rarely better than being invisible. She watched a woman climb a ladder near the east wall, hanging bundles of dried heather along the gallery railing. The woman's name was Polly, and she worked in the kitchens, and 3 hours ago she had come by with a small cloth folded tight. Inside it had been a piece of salted bread and a wedge of hard cheese. She had set it on the floor within Tyne's reach without making eye contact or saying a single word, and the act had been so careful and so deliberate in its carefulness. The way you are careful with something that might break, that Tyne had stared at the cloth for a full minute before she could make herself eat. The bread had tasted like nothing. Her stomach had been grateful anyway. Now she watched Polly work and thought about what Accord Master Reth had told her 4 days ago when his men had first come to the washing room. He had said it with the kind of practiced neutrality that powerful men use when they want to describe terrible things without calling them terrible. He had said, "You have been identified through the bloodline registry as the fated mate of the Alpha Lord Darrow. Under the Iron Accord, Lord Darrow cannot be crowned while a mate bond remains active. The bond must be severed publicly before the 4 territory witnesses. You will be present at the ceremony. You will be bound in Accord silver. The severance will be performed, after which you will be relocated to the Western Reach." She had asked him what the Western Reach was. He had not answered. She had been in the Accord silver bindings for 56 hours. The silver, threaded through the rope, reacted to wolf blood, burning slowly through skin rather than simply resting against it. This was, as far as anyone had told her, irrelevant, because she was null blood, registered at age 12 when the territory officers had come to the Greywood Pack compound and tested every child. The strip hadn't changed color. The officer had written null in her file, and 2 weeks later the Greywood Alpha had traded her to Ironspire to settle a water rights debt, and she had been here ever since. She was worth less than water rights. She was 24 years old, and the creases on her fingers from 12 years of wringing wet cloth had become permanent, pale lines that wouldn't smooth no matter how much rendered fat she rubbed into them. She had no wolf, no pack, no family that she could name. She had a cot in a room off the laundry, a single change of clothing, and a very clear understanding of her own position in the world, which made it difficult to explain why the silver was burning her. Silver only burned wolf blood. She had not told anyone. There were things she had kept to herself for a very long time. The way her eyes sometimes reflected lamplight in the dark, flat and bright like coins at the bottom of a well. The way dogs went still and watchful when she entered a room, not afraid, but attentive. The dreams she had every night without exception, where she ran through open fields on 4 legs, and the grass bent away from her paws like it was making room. She had kept all of it folded away in the same place. She kept everything that didn't fit the story she'd been told about herself. She was null blood. She had no wolf. The bindings were burning her, and she pressed her wrists together under the rope and watched Polly hang Heather and did not make a sound. The main doors of the hall opened at the 7th hour. She heard them before she felt the shift in the air, the groan of iron hinges, the rush of cold that came in from the exterior corridor, carrying with it the smell of pine resin and frost-wet stone and something else, something underneath both of those. Tyne's body went rigid before she'd processed what she was smelling. It was like the air before a storm breaks, electrical, raw, ozone-sharp, and layered beneath it something warmer, something that smelled like hearthwood and deep forest and the particular cold clarity of high-altitude wind. She did not have a word for it. Her body did not need one. Her body simply recognized it the way it recognized the smell of smoke or the sound of her own name. The wolf she didn't have lifted its head in the center of her chest and said, very quietly but with absolute certainty, "There." She did not look up. She could not look up. She had heard enough, had overheard enough, in the washing room and the kitchen corridors and the servants' passage behind the council chamber, to know that eye contact solidified the bond, that once she looked at him and he looked at her, the thread between them would pull taut and irreversible, and then tomorrow's ceremony would not simply be humiliating, it would be physically violent. Severing a fully solidified bond was not clean. It left things missing that you could not get back. So she stared at the floor and counted the cracks in the granite and breathed through her mouth. The footsteps came closer, not the quick, purposeful stride of a man on an errand, the measured, unhurried walk of someone who had never needed to hurry, because the world arranged itself around him, heavy boots. The kind worn by someone who actually walked his territory rather than riding through it. They stopped directly in front of her. She could see the boots, brown leather, not ceremonial black, worn at the heels, a smear of dark mud along the left toe that hadn't been cleaned. He had come from outside, from the North Trail where the meltwater turned the path to silt for 3 months of the year. "Why are you bound?" His voice wasn't a question. It was low, deliberate, the kind of sound that came from somewhere deep in the chest and didn't need volume to carry. It moved through the stone floor and up into her kneecaps and along her spine and settled in her teeth. She did not answer. "I'm asking you a question." Closer now, he had crouched. She could see his hands, large, scarred across the knuckles, nails short and clean, the hands of someone who worked alongside his people rather than above them. "Look at me." "I can't," she said. A pause. The weight of his attention was a physical thing, pressing down on the top of her skull. "Why not?" "Because if I do, it gets worse for both of us." Another pause, longer. She heard him exhale slowly through his nose. Then one of his hands reached out and touched the accord silver rope at her wrist, not gripping, just a single fingertip contact, and she heard the faint hiss of silver reacting to his alpha blood. His hand went very still. "This is burning you," he said, and his voice had changed. It was the same low register, the same controlled delivery, but underneath it something had cracked open slightly, a fracture in the composure. "This rope is burning your skin. Silver reacts to wolf blood. You're registered null blood. I know what I'm registered." She felt him go absolutely still beside her, the stillness of a predator processing something that doesn't fit the expected pattern. Then, quietly, "Who put you here?" "Accord, Master Reth." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "Stand up," he said. She looked pointedly at the binding that tethered her wrists to the anchor ring in the floor. He followed her gaze. She watched something move through his expression. Not embarrassment, something sharper, something that looked like it had been building for a long time and had simply found the correct object to fix itself upon. "What's your name?" "Tyne." He repeated it the way you repeat something you're memorizing, pressing it down into your tongue, testing its weight. "Tyne." Then, quieter, "How long have you been kneeling on this floor?" 2 days. She heard his teeth come together. The muscles in his jaw went rigid, his hands, resting on his knees, curled slowly into fists and then deliberately uncurled again. "I'm going to leave," he said. "I'll be back before the morning watch. Do not let anyone touch those bindings while I'm gone. If someone tries, if Reth tries, you call out. I'll hear you." She almost asked how that was possible. He hadn't been in the keep 5 minutes, but the certainty in his voice was not the bravado of a man making promises he couldn't keep. It was the certainty of a dominant alpha who knew the exact radius of his own awareness, and she believed it despite herself. He left through the side passage, not the main doors. His footsteps in the corridor outside moved faster than they had when he'd entered. Polly descended from her ladder and crossed the hall in 12 careful steps. She crouched beside Tyne the way you crouch beside something fragile. Was that? Yes. Polly looked at the side passage door, then back at Tyne's face. He looked angry. He looked like he wanted to break something. Yes, Polly's voice was careful. That's what I meant. The hall filled through the afternoon. Elders, court officials, the 4 territory witnesses who had traveled to Ironspire specifically to see the Iron Accord ceremony performed. Tyne watched them from the anchor ring, chin just above her bound wrists, and counted the ways she had been made invisible by this room. Elder Reth came at the 6th bell. He was a square man with a shaved head and the particular posture of someone who had spent his entire life mistaking authority for strength. He walked through the hall with his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes moving over everything, checking, measuring, and when they landed on Tyne, they did not change expression. "The Accord Lord has been asking about you," he said. "I know." "He seems agitated." Reth crouched in front of her, inspecting the binding rope with the detached efficiency of a man checking equipment. "I need to know whether the bond was triggered." She considered lying, but Reth wasn't stupid. She had learned that in 12 years of keeping out of his way. Stupid cruelty she could predict. Intelligent cruelty she had to respect the way you respect a current. "Yes," she said. He exhaled through his nose. "Look at me." She looked. "The Iron Accord has been performed 6 times in the recorded history of this territory," he said. 6 times. And each time, the severance ensured a stable succession. Do you know what happens if Lord Darrow refuses the ceremony? The 4 territory witnesses are also the 4 border lords. Under the Accord, the crowning requires their simultaneous witness. If Darrow refuses the severance before all 4, the ceremony is void, and a void ceremony cannot simply be repeated with the severance removed. The Accord's wording is explicit. A lord who fails the ceremony cannot be crowned under it. The succession reverts to challenge. He paused. "Do you understand what that means?" She did. She had heard it in the council passages for years, the way you hear things when people forget you're in the room. Darrow's father had been killed in a border skirmish 8 months ago. The 4 border lords had been patient, but they had been watching. Patient the way wolves watched before they moved. "What happens to me after?" she asked. "You'll be relocated." "Where?" Reth straightened. "Somewhere appropriate." She let the silence sit between them. She had learned in 12 years of being overlooked that silence was a tool. That men who expected responses became unsettled when they didn't receive them. Reth's jaw worked. "You'll be provided for," he said finally. "Like a retired horse," she said. "Like a ward of the crown who has performed a service. And if I refuse..." The composure shifted. Not cracked. Reth's composure did not crack, but she saw something move beneath it. Not anger, Fear. The particular fear of someone who has built an entire structure and can feel its foundation developing a tremor. You cannot refuse, he said. The accord silver prevents a wolf from shifting or exerting force. You cannot resist what is going to happen in that ceremony. But I am offering you the opportunity to be, he searched for the word, cooperative. It will be easier if you are cooperative. She said nothing. He left. He came back at the second hour of morning. The hall was empty except for the night guard at the main doors, an older man named Berthold who had worked Ironspire's nights for 20 years and who, she had observed, slept sitting upright with his eyes open in a way that might have been admirable in other circumstances. Darrow came through the side passage, moving the way a predator moves through unfamiliar dark. Silent despite his size, each footfall precise, he was carrying something. Two things, a clay cup in one hand, a small jar in the other. He crouched in front of her. The cup was broth, bone broth, from the smell, rich and deep, with thyme floating on the surface. She stared at it for a moment too long. Your hands are bound, he said, without making it condescending, simply acknowledging a fact. He held the cup to her lips. She drank slowly. The warmth spread through her chest like sunrise, and her eyes stung, and she was furious with herself for the stinging, and she drank every drop anyway. He set the cup aside, opened the jar. Inside was a salve that smelled of beeswax and comfrey, amber-colored, thick. Without asking, he took her wrist, carefully, so carefully the rope slack enough for his fingers to slide under, and began working the salve into the burns along her forearm. His touch was warm and precise, and his hands shook, not with uncertainty, with the effort of staying controlled when everything in him clearly wanted to be less controlled. I went to the Elder Council tonight, he said. He worked the salve into the second wrist with the same methodical care. I told them I won't perform the severance. The warmth from the broth drained out of her. Darrow. They told me that if I refuse, the crowning fails. The 4 border lords challenge the succession. I know, Reth told me. Reth. Something flat entered his voice at the name. Yes, I imagine he did. He recapped the jar, tucked it inside his coat, met her eyes. His were amber, the dark amber of maple resin, and they were burning with something she didn't have a name for. What he didn't tell you is what happens to this territory if a Cordmaster Gethan of the Eastern Reach takes the crown instead. Do you know what Gethan did to the Nullblood population in his territory last year? She did. The forced relocation orders, the restricted movement zones, the camps near the southern border that were described in official documents with careful neutral language that meant something else entirely. You should do it, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The severance. You should do it and take the crown. He looked at her for a long moment, like she had said something in a language he didn't speak. I mean it, she said. I'm no one. I'm a laundry worker. I have no wolf, no family, no... Stop. The word was quiet. It was absolute. It stopped her voice in her throat the way a wall stops water. He leaned forward. His hand came up and his thumb touched the bruise on her jaw, the one Reth's man had given her when she'd initially resisted being taken from the washing room, and the contact was so light she barely felt it. But the bond, the thing she'd been trying not to acknowledge since the moment she first smelled him, sang at the touch. Every nerve in her body woke up like a struck bell. You are not no one, he said, and the crown that asks me to cut you out of my soul is not a crown I want to wear. She wanted to be practical. She wanted to be reasonable, to say the sensible thing, to be the dutiful null-blood servant girl who understood her position. Instead, she said, barely above a whisper, I can feel a wolf inside me. She's been awake since you walked in. He went absolutely still. They told me I'm null-blood, she said. I've believed it for 12 years, but silver only burns wolves. She turned her wrists so he could see the chemical marks the accord silver had left on her skin, and it has been burning me since the moment they put these on. She watched the understanding land on him, the connections assembling behind his eyes, one after another, like locks turning. "Who tested you?" he asked, "when you were registered?" "An officer from the Territory Records Office. I was 12. I was at Greywood Pack." Something changed in his face. The name Greywood did something specific and significant to his expression, and she watched him recognize something he had not expected to recognize. "What pack were you born into?" he asked, "before Greywood?" "I was found," she said, "an orphan. That's what they told me." 24 years ago, he said slowly. The Greywood Alpha's sister was killed in a fire at her home compound. She was killed. Her mate was killed. Their infant was. He stopped. His jaw was tight. Listed as killed. The hall was very quiet. "The Greywood Alpha's sister," Tyne said carefully. "Which bloodline?" "Solith." His voice had gone stripped of its authority, almost reverent. "The pack-binding bloodline. The one the old texts say can stabilize and strengthen the bond between any allied pack, can forge alliances that outlast generations. The bloodline that hasn't produced a wolf in 30 years. He looked at her. The bloodline that 3 border lords spent considerable resources making sure would never produce one again." The silence that followed lasted a long time. "Someone lied about the fire," she said. "Someone paid for the fire." He stood, paced, 3 steps one direction, 3 back, and she could see him thinking, the political weight of it moving through his face. If she was Solith, she wasn't a null-blood servant worth less than water rights. She was the most significant wolf in the Ashenvale territory, possibly in any territory, and someone had spent 24 years making certain no one knew it. "I need to speak to Elder Aldovan," he said. "Not Reth." Not Reth. His eyes were steady. Aldovan was on the records panel that processed the Greywood fire. He has been very quiet about it for a very long time. But quiet people and indifferent people are not the same thing. Aldovan has a conscience. It's just buried. He moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. "Before dawn," he said, "I'm going to come back here and I'm going to take those bindings off you. And there is nothing and no one in this territory that will stop me. I need you to know that." She looked at him. This man she had known for half a night. This lord without a crown. This alpha whose wolf she could feel pressing against his skin like something barely contained. "I know," she said. He left through the side passage and the hall settled around her, and Polly appeared from behind a pillar where she had clearly been for some time. "How long were you there?" Tyne asked. "Long enough," Polly said. She sat down on the floor beside Tyne without ceremony, cross-legged, and the two of them sat in the dark hall together while the candles burned low. Elder Aldovan came alone at the 4th hour with a lantern that swung shadows across his thin face. He was an old man, not powerful old, just old. The kind of old where you can see the specific weight of what someone has been carrying by the set of their shoulders. He crossed the hall slowly and crouched in front of her with the careful movements of someone whose knees had their own opinions. He did not speak for a long time. "The fire at the Solith compound," he said finally, "was not an accident." Tyne waited. "The panel that processed the report. I was on that panel. We knew." His hands were folded very tightly together in his lap. There was a consensus that the Solith bloodline represented a destabilizing influence. The theory being that a pack-binding wolf, bonded to a dominant alpha, would shift the balance of power in a way that could not be controlled. His mouth tightened. The panel authorized the action. "You killed a family," Tyne said. Her voice was flat. She did not have the energy for anger yet. Anger was for later, when the bindings were off. "I wrote the report afterward," Aldovan said. "I did not vote for the action. I wrote the report that justified it." He looked at her with eyes that had not slept well in a long time. "I understand that distinction matters to no one but me. Where is the operative? The one who was supposed to?" She stopped. "The one who was supposed to finish it." "She didn't," Aldovan exhaled. She was ordered to ensure the infant didn't survive. She took the infant instead, placed her with the Greywood pack, registered her as a foundling, administered a compound in food that suppresses wolf blood, keeps the wolf dormant, prevents the shift, neutralizes the blood test reagent. He paused. When you left Greywood for Ironspire at age 12, the dosing stopped, but your wolf had been suppressed long enough that she couldn't surface on her own. She needed a catalyst, Tyne said. A mate bond, yes. She stared at the lantern. The flame moved in a draft she couldn't feel. Why are you telling me this now? Because Lord Darrow came to me tonight, Aldovan said, and asked me why I was the only elder who hadn't met his eyes once in the past 6 years. He stood slowly, knees cracking. I could not lie to him. I have lied about many things. I could not lie about that. He turned to leave. The compound wore out of your system years ago. Your wolf is yours. What you do with that is yours. He left. Tyne sat alone in the amber-dark hall and felt her wolf, felt her properly for the first time, not as a muffled presence or a warmth in her chest, but as a full living thing pressing against the inside of her ribs, golden and enormous and furious and patient all at once. She stopped telling her to wait. The ceremony began at dawn. The hall was full, all 4 border lords in their formal dress, the elder council on the raised days, the castle staff crowded into the gallery above. The crown sat on its velvet cushion, black iron inlaid with green stone, old and heavy and warm from the candles around it. Tyne had been placed at the center of the hall, the binding rope's anchor line taut, her position designed to make her look small, diminished, not worth keeping. She knelt with her back straight. Darrow entered through the main doors, and the noise of the hall fell away. He was dressed for the ceremony, dark leather over a dark shirt, the formal attire of the Ashenvale line, a grey fur-trimmed cloak across his shoulders. His boots were clean. He walked the central aisle with the deliberate step of someone who was measuring each footfall against something internal, some decision already made and settled into stone. He passed her without looking at her. He climbed to the dais, turned, faced the hall. Their eyes met across 60 feet of cold stone floor. The bond pulled taut between them, and her wolf pressed against her ribs, and she held still. Elder Reth stepped forward with his ceremonial staff. The old words, the history of the Ashenvale line, the duties of the crown, the responsibility of the Lord to his people, the formal language of succession that had been recited 6 times before in this hall and was supposed to be recited a 7th time today, just like this, with the fated mate, kneeling at the anchor ring, and the Lord looking down at her from the dais with the elders waiting for his word. The ceremony reached the accord clause. The Lord must ascend unbound. The active mate bond is an impediment to pure service. The bond must be witnessed and severed before the assembled council and representatives. Lord Darrow, do you see before you the one the bond has marked? I see her, Darrow said. His voice filled the hall without effort. Do you acknowledge the bond? I acknowledge it. Do you, before the Elder Council and the assembled lords of the 4 territories, sever this bond, release this claim, and ascend to the lordship of Ashenvale free and unbound? The hall went silent. The complete total silence of a held breath. Darrow looked at Tyne across the hall. His amber eyes were burning. No, he said. The sound that followed was extraordinary. Voices rising, chairs scraping, Reth's voice cutting through with sharp procedural fury, someone on the gallery dropping something that shattered on the stone. The 4 border lords surging upright in their seats, all speaking at once. Darrow did not move. When he spoke again, his voice did not rise. It did not need to. It cut through the noise the way a blade cuts through water, without effort, without resistance. The iron accord requires a lord ascend pure, he said. I accept this requirement, but the accord does not define what pure means. The council has interpreted it to mean the absence of a mate bond. He looked at Reth. I reject this interpretation. Pure means uncorrupted, untainted by falsehood. He let that land. And the only corruption in this hall today is the lie that has been maintained for 24 years about the woman at that anchor ring. The noise shifted from outrage to something more uncertain, heads turning, whispers crossing the gallery. On the dais, Elder Aldervan sat very still with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes fixed on the far wall. Darrow descended the dais steps, 3 steps, slow. He walked the central aisle, and the crowd pulled back from him without being asked, because whatever he was radiating, whatever force the bond and his wolf and his fury had compressed into the space around him, it was not something anybody in the hall wanted to be in the path of. He stopped in front of Tyne. She looked up at him. He looked at the accord silver rope, at the burns along her forearms, at the way her wrists were raw and bleeding into the binding, at the 2 days of kneeling visible in the rigid set of her spine, and his expression did something she hadn't seen on a face in a very long time. It went to war with itself, tenderness losing to fury, and both of them losing to something older and more fundamental than either. He reached down and wrapped both hands around the anchor rope. The silver burned him the moment he touched it. She could see it, could feel it through the bond, the bright pain of it in his palms. He did not let go. What followed was not a snap or a crack. It was a sustained, agonized scream of rope fiber and cord and braided metal, the sound of something forged specifically to hold a wolf being subjected to something beyond what it was forged for. Darrow's jaw set and his arms shook and the cords of his neck went rigid, and then the anchor line parted with a crack loud enough to echo off the stone ceiling. The freed end recoiled against the floor. Tyne's arms flew upward. He took her wrists in his hands. His grip was careful around the burned skin, specific and deliberate. He unwound the accord silver rope from her right wrist, then her left, then crouched at her feet and freed her ankles. Each loop removed with his bare hands, the silver marking his palms wherever he touched it. When the last binding fell away, Tyne stood. Her legs buckled. 12 years of knowing her place, 12 years of being small, 2 days on her knees in the center of a hall designed to make her irrelevant. Her legs buckled, and Darrow caught her, and his arm went around her waist like a counterweight, and she could feel his heartbeat through his formal attire. Fast, much faster than his composure suggested. "This woman," he said, and his voice was not for her now. It was for the hall, for every face staring down from the gallery, for the 4 border lords, for history, for the record that Aldervan had once falsified and would now have to set right. This woman was born Solith, last of the pack-binding line. Her family was killed 24 years ago by people in this territory who were afraid of what her bloodline meant. She was placed into servitude. Her wolf was suppressed through medication in her food. She was registered as null blood to strip her of every protection the law provides. She was brought to this hall and bound in silver and placed on her knees so that I would look at her and see nothing worth keeping. The word Solith moved through the crowd like a stone through still water. "I am not severing this bond," he said. "I am claiming it. I am claiming her as my mate, my Luna, and my equal. And if the crown requires me to cut the goddess's own work from my soul, then it is the crown that is corrupt, not the bond." Reth moved. He was fast, faster than a man of his build had a right to be, launching from the dais with a short ceremonial blade in his hand, not pointed at Darrow but at Tyne, because Tyne was the knot. Cut the knot and the ceremony could still proceed. Remove the complication, and everything returned to the arrangement he had spent 24 years maintaining. Tyne saw the blade, saw the light catch its edge, silver-thin in the amber air. Her wolf did not ask permission. The shift was not the gradual, controlled thing she had imagined it would be. It was an eruption, white-gold light that didn't simply illuminate the hall, but replaced the hall's air. A pressure wave that swept outward from where she stood and hit every wolf in the room in the chest simultaneously. Every wolf in the room went to their knees. Every wolf except Darrow, who staggered but held, his arms still around her, his eyes still open, streaming from the light but open because he would not look away from her. Not now. Where Tyne had stood there was a wolf. Golden, not the gold of jewelry or decoration, the gold of firelight through amber, the gold of afternoon light through forest canopy, warm and deep and moving with an internal luminance that had nothing to do with the candles in the hall. She was large, larger than any Omega wolf had any reason to be, and her eyes, when she opened them, were the color of clear water, colorless and completely transparent, seeing everything. The hall was utterly still. Reth had frozen mid-stride, his blade was still raised. His face had been stripped of everything he had built on top of it. All the calculation, all the procedural composure, all the careful management, stripped down to what was underneath, which was a man confronted with 24 years of a decision he had believed was settled. His hand opened. The blade fell, it hit the stone floor and rang once, clean and sharp. He stepped back. The golden wolf turned her transparent eyes to the Elder Council. 7 faces in various states of shock and recognition. Aldervan's face, she noted, looked the way a man looks when he has been carrying something for a very long time and has finally been told he can put it down. She shifted back. The light receded slowly. Tyne stood human again, barefoot on the cold stone, her dress torn from the shift, Darrow's hand on her arm. Her wrists were still raw and bleeding, but the burns from the Accord silver were already closing, the Solith blood doing what Solith blood did when it was finally fully awake. She looked at Reth. He stood 6 feet from her, the dropped blade at his feet, his chest heaving, the square jaw, the shaved head, the man who had come to the washing room at the 3rd hour of morning and told her she would be relocated, who had described her as a ward of the Crown performing a service. Who authorized the Solith fire, she said, 24 years ago. Give me a name. Reth's mouth opened, closed, his eyes moved to the 4 border lords, to the Elder Council, to the exits, calculating, even now. Elder Marin, he said. She organized it, she funded it. He paused, she died 11 years ago. Tyne absorbed this. The architect of her parents' deaths dead for 11 years. No confrontation, no reckoning, just an old woman who had made a calculation and had eventually died of ordinary causes the way people who do terrible things in service of ideology often do. It was not satisfying. It was not supposed to be. She looked at Reth for a long moment. He had not given the order. He had maintained the order's consequences, enforced the silence, run the ceremony that was designed to complete what the fire had started. He had also been right, technically, about the border lords, right about the fragility of the succession. Even people who do cruel things are sometimes correct about specific facts. You said, she said, that if the bond wasn't severed, the 4 territory lords would challenge the succession. Yes. Is that still true? She let her eyes move, just briefly, to their golden transparency. Now? Reth looked at the 4 border lords. She watched him calculate, watched the machine behind his eyes run through the scenarios, the political math, the weight of a pack-binding wolf standing in the center of Ironspire's great hall with her mate at her side. No, he said finally, it is not still true. She nodded. Then she turned away from him. Not forgiveness, not punishment, simply a removal of attention, the way you stop looking at something that no longer requires your focus. And she faced the Elder Council. Crown him, she said. They crowned Darrow in the center of the hall without ceremony. No rehearsed words, no formal register. Just Aldovan taking the crown from its cushion and carrying it down the dais steps and placing it on Darrow's bowed head, while the hall watched in the particular silence of people witnessing something they will be trying to describe accurately for the rest of their lives. The crown fit. Darrow straightened. The green inlaid iron caught the light. He looked like what he was, a lord, a wolf, a man who had chosen his mate over his throne and been given both. The hall roared, and in the noise and the surge of voices, Darrow turned to Tyne and took her face in both hands. His palms were marked red from the accord silver. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, careful around the bruise. He leaned his forehead against hers, closed his eyes. "Mine," he said. "Not possessive, declarative, the way you say the river runs north or the sun rose this morning. A statement of fact about the shape of the world." "Yours," she said. He took her from the hall, through the side passage, the corridor, the stairs, the private chambers at the keep's upper floor. She had cleaned these rooms 100 times. She knew the texture of the rugs, the way the western window threw a rectangle of afternoon light across the floor, the weight of the curtains. She had changed the sheets and dusted the mantel and never once sat in any of the chairs. Darrow closed the door and locked it and stood with his back against it and exhaled once, slow. The fire was already laid in the hearth. The flames were low and orange. She sat on the floor in front of it. Not the chair, the floor, because the warmth was immediate and the rug was thick, and her body was shaking in the particular way of someone who has been holding something together for a very long time and has finally been told they can stop. He sat beside her, not facing her. Beside her, shoulder to shoulder, his warmth radiating through the fur-trimmed cloak she didn't remember him putting around her, but which was now around her shoulders and smelled like him. They sat in silence for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, a wind moved through the pines. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. When I shifted, when she finally came out, I felt it. All of it. 24 years of everything. The compound wearing away, the wolf waking. And, under all of it, she stopped, searched for the right shape. I felt my parents, not their presence, the shape of what should have been there. The absence of hands that should have known me. She pressed her wrists together in her lap, feeling the marks of the accord silver. "I will carry that. It won't leave, because the truth came out. It'll sit alongside everything else. I need you to know that before you mark me." He was quiet for a long moment. "My father died 8 months ago," he said, "and there are mornings when I reach for his advice before I remember." A pause. "I find the same empty space you're describing." She exhaled. "So we'll carry them together," he said, "the ones who should be here, all of it." She tilted her head, offered the curve of her neck. His breath was warm at her throat, and his hands were careful in her hair, and the bond between them pulled taut like a plucked string, and then, when his teeth found skin, it broke open entirely, not into pain but into him, his grief and his rage and his protectiveness and his steady, absolute certainty that she was his and he was hers, and nothing in the world or out of it was going to change that. She gasped. Her hands found his arms and held on. The bond sealed, not in a hall with witnesses, not with ceremony or elder's blessing, with two people sitting on a rug in firelight, holding each other the way the almost drowned hold anything solid. The fire popped and settled. The wind moved through the pines outside and made a sound like breathing. In the great hall below, the place where the anchor ring sat embedded in the floor, where the accord silver rope had been fastened, where she had bled into the stone for 2 days, Darrow had given one instruction before leaving. The binding rope was to stay. The ring was to stay. The rope end, severed by his hands, still bright where the fibers had torn. Not as a monument, not as a shrine to suffering, as evidence. So that no one who came after, no elder, no lord, no generation that had not been there, could look at that stone floor and pretend it had not happened, could pretend the rope had not been real, or the blood, or the 24 years of a woman folded into the negative space of other people's attention, while the thing she actually was waited, patient and golden, for a reason to wake up. The rope lay on the cold granite, the torn end still bright. The fire burned in the upper room, and outside the keep the pines moved in the wind, and the sound they made was nothing like a lament.